debate over the Democrats' rhetoric was just the warm-up, and now the next big target emerged. Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. Garrett Haake was the first to speak, his tone calm but cutting like a surgeon's scalpel. Karoline, let's talk about Elon Musk. He's now heading up this so-called Department of Government Efficiency, a department, I should note, that didn't even exist before in American history. What exactly is going on here? Why does the U.S. government need a tech billionaire to run a newly created department? And how can we be sure this isn't just a way for Musk to expand his influence in government, especially when his companies SpaceX, Tesla, Starlink hold billions in federal contracts? The question hung in the air, heavy as an unexploded bomb. A few reporters whispered, others scribbled furiously, sensing the chance to dig into one of the Trump administration's most contentious issues. She didn't hesitate, didn't blink. "Thanks for asking, Garrett," she began, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as steel. "Let me address your question piece by piece because I think it's important we get the full picture here. First, what's going on? Exactly what President Trump was elected to do. The American people sent a clear message in 2024. They're fed up with a bloated, inefficient, unaccountable government. They want a government that works better, spends less, and delivers real results. That's precisely why the Department of Government Efficiency was created. This isn't some random idea, Garrett. It's a core campaign promise from the president, and he's delivering on it." She paused, then pressed on, her voice growing sharper. "Second, why Elon Musk? Well, let me ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. If you needed someone to fix a complex, wasteful, outdated system, who would you pick? A politician who's spent their whole life in the Washington swamp, or someone who's proven they can innovate, cut costs, and deliver results in the toughest environments on Earth? Look at SpaceX, a company that slashed rocket launch costs from hundreds of millions to tens of millions, while NASA still struggles with billion-dollar contracts. Look at Tesla, a company that revolutionized the auto industry while bigger competitors clung to combustion engines. Or Starlink, bringing internet to remote areas that traditional telecoms ignored for decades. Karoline leaned forward, her eyes flashing with a defiant spark. So, why Elon Musk? Because you won't find anyone else on this planet who can do it better. And if you think picking the best person for the job is a bad thing, then maybe the problem isn't with us, it's with how you view efficiency. Garrett didn't back down. He straightened up, his tone sharpening as if trying to pry open a crack. "All right, Karoline, but you still haven't answered the biggest question. Musk's companies have billions in federal contracts. SpaceX has deals with NASA and the Pentagon. Starlink provides services to the U.S. military. Tesla gets tax credits and subsidies from the government. How can we trust this isn't a massive conflict of interest? How do we know Musk isn't using his DOGE position to benefit his companies? And how can this administration ensure American taxpayers aren't being exploited?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Karoline. This was the moment many reporters hoped she'd stumble. A question about ethics, conflicts of interest, and accountability, issues the Trump administration often faced criticism over. "Garrett, I really appreciate your concern. I do," she said, her tone polite but laced with irony. "But if the biggest problem you can find with this administration is that we're asking one of the planet's most successful innovators to help make government more efficient, then I'd say we're doing pretty damn well. But since you ask, I'll answer straight, not because I have to, but because I want to set the record straight once and for all. The president was asked this question earlier this week, and he answered clearly, if Elon Musk ever faces a conflict of interest with contracts or funding Doge overseas, he will recuse himself from those decisions. That's basic federal law, Garrett, and I know you because you're a good journalist. So why are you trying to turn this into a scandal instead of just asking me how we ensure compliance? Garrett opened his mouth to retort, but Karoline raised a hand, silencing him like a teacher reining in a rowdy classroom. No, I'm not done," she said, her voice firm as steel. "Let me clarify one more thing, because I think it's critical we put this in context. You talk about conflicts of interest? Fine, let's talk about conflicts of interest. For decades, Washington politicians have handed out lucrative contracts to defense companies, pharmaceutical giants, and big tech firms while they or their families sat on those companies' boards. Let's talk about the billions in taxpayer money wasted on opaque contracts like the $10 billion Boeing deal for a missile system that still doesn't work, while SpaceX has launched hundreds of satellites for a fraction of the cost. Let's talk about the millions in campaign donations from pharma companies while drug prices in America are double what they are in other developed nations. That's a conflict of interest, Garrett, and that's what this administration is trying to fix. And I'll add one more thing because I think this matters. If you really care about conflicts of interest, why aren't you asking tougher questions about the people actually hurting this country? Why don't you ask the Democrats calling for fighting in the streets if they're taking money from radical lobbying groups? Why don't you ask them why they're more worried about Elon Musk fixing government waste than about how their own incendiary rhetoric is tearing this country apart? The room erupted in whispers, rapid keystrokes, and loaded glances. Karoline stepped back, her gaze sweeping the crowd like a gladiator who just landed a knockout blow, waiting for the next challenger. The room was still simmering from the exchange about Gaza, but now a new topic was thrown into the mix. USAID funding, a fresh spark in the war between the administration and the media. Kaylee from CNN spoke up, her tone sharp as a blade, though her face remained unreadable, like a poker player hiding their strongest card. Karoline, the president and you today have made it clear that given the current devastation, Palestinians have no choice but to leave Gaza and go elsewhere. But Palestinians say this is their home. They don't want to go. Last night, President Trump said on X that he's willing to use the military if necessary. So let me ask you plainly, is the United States prepared to forcibly remove Palestinians from Gaza? And if so, isn't that a grave violation of international norms, as some human rights groups have warned? The question hung in the air, heavy as an unexploded bomb. The room felt eerily silent. Even for a White House press briefing, this was a high-stakes moment. Kaylee, I'm glad you brought this up, Karoline began, her voice steady and deliberate. Let's get right to it, and I'll start by clarifying one thing. This administration doesn't want to force anyone out of their homes. We want to rebuild Gaza, not destroy it. We want peace, not war. And we want to ensure that all peace-loving people in the region, whether Palestinian, Israeli, or anyone else, can live in safety, prosperity, and freedom. But let me make one more thing clear because I think it's critical we understand the root of this issue. What we're seeing in Gaza, the destruction, the suffering, the loss, isn't the result of American policy or any U.S. action. This is the result of Iran-backed terrorists, Hamas, who've brutalized not just Israelis, but the very Palestinians they claim to protect. Let's look at the numbers, Kaylee, because I know you like hard data. According to the United Nations, Hamas has fired over 10,000 rockets into Israeli territory since 2005, many launched from residential areas, hospitals, and schools, using Palestinians as human shields. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, over 40% of Hamas's budget goes to building terror tunnels, while only 10% is spent on public services like healthcare and education. So, Kaylee, what do you want us to do? Sit back and let Hamas keep destroying the lives of both Palestinians and Israelis? Or do you want us to act to bring real peace? All right, Karoline, Kaylee pressed, undeterred. The president said he's willing to use the military. So, is the United States prepared to forcibly remove Palestinians from Gaza? And if so, isn't that a grave violation of international norms, as some human rights groups have warned? Karoline tilted her head slightly, her gaze locking onto Kaylee like a hawk, zeroing in on prey. If you really care about international norms, why aren't you asking tougher questions of Hamas, who violated every imaginable international standard? Why don't you ask them why they use children as human shields, as documented in Human Rights Watch's 2023 report? Why don't you ask why they fire rockets from schools and hospitals, as recorded in the UN's 2024 report? And why don't you ask why they've rejected every peace offer from Israel, Egypt, and the United States since 2005? Now, to your question, will the U.S. use force? Let me be clear, the president hasn't committed to sending U.S. troops to the region, but it's an option. And I'll explain why, because I think context matters. We're working with allies in the region, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and others, to find a lasting solution for Gaza. But if Hamas keeps rejecting peace, if they keep devastating their own people's lives, we'll do everything in our power to ensure this region doesn't become a threat to U.S. national security. And I'll add one more thing, Kaylee, because this matters. President Trump is a peacemaker. He proved that in his first term with the Abraham Accords, bringing peace between Israel and 4 Arab nations. something decades of so-called experts failed to achieve. So if you want to ask me about international norms, ask me how we're trying to bring peace instead of just trying to trap me with hypotheticals. In 2025, America is in a period of upheaval. After the 2024 election, Donald Trump returns to the White House with a pledge to make America greater than ever. But the nation is more divided than ever before. Hot button issues, immigration, international conflicts, economic reform, and the role of tech billionaires in government are boiling over in public discourse. Violent protests erupt in major cities, fueled by calls to fight from both political sides. Meanwhile, the emergence of the Department of Government Efficiency, DAEG, led by Elon Musk, has ignited fierce debates over conflicts of interest and power. At the center of this storm is Karoline Leavitt, the new White House press secretary. One of the youngest ever to hold the role, her sharpness, toughness, and unrelenting resolve have made her a formidable figure. Today is a pivotal day. A series of controversial Trump administration policies are about to be unveiled, including an executive order banning biological males from female sports, a plan to rebuild Gaza, and a bold economic proposal that could overhaul America's tax system entirely. Karoline knows this press briefing is a battlefield, and she must dominate it. She steps up to the podium, no notes in hand, no sideways glances to aides for reassurance. Her eyes, sharp as blades, sweep across the room, sizing up every face, every challenging stare. Hands shoot up instantly, a forest of pointed spears aimed straight at her. But instead of calling on anyone, Karoline lets the silence stretch, letting the tension grow stifling. Then, with a low, cutting voice like a honed sword, she speaks, not to answer, but to strike first. Today, I want us all to play a little thought game, she begins, leaning forward, her eyes glinting with a dangerous spark. Imagine, just for a second, that a Republican leader stood at this podium and declared, "We need to take the fight to the streets. This is a war." Picture that, she pauses, letting the words sink deep into every mind in the room. I don't need to imagine your reaction. I know what it would be. This room would erupt in outrage. Headlines would scream about inciting violence. Social media would explode with calls for impeachment, even arrest. And don't tell me I'm wrong. We've all seen it happen. Karoline notices a few reporters exchanging glances, trying to guess where she's headed. But she doesn't give them time to think. So why, she continues, her voice sharpening like a knife slicing through the air, when elected Democrats, people chosen by voters, not random trolls online, say those exact same things, do we get silence? No, not just silence, excuses, cover-ups, and in some cases praise from people right here in this room. She stops, her gaze sweeping the rows like a hawk hunting prey. Today, I'm not playing dodgeball. I'm not letting you control the narrative. We're going to talk about hypocrisy, about injustice, and about what's really happening in this country. So, who wants to go first? The room explodes into controlled chaos. Hands wave more frantically. A few reporters even stand, vying for her attention. But Karoline, with a faint, commanding smile, points to a familiar face in the front row. Richard from Fox News, always ready with tough questions, though today she knows he'll amplify her momentum. Richard, she says, her tone calm but loaded with intent. Let's get started. Thank you, Karoline. With what you just said, I have to ask, are any officials in this administration gearing up to confront Democratic lawmakers in the streets? I mean, if they're calling for a fight, how does the Trump administration plan to respond? Absolutely not, Richard, she replies, her voice firm as steel. Let me make this crystal clear, once and for all. This administration believes in law and order, not street violence. We're not the ones stoking war. We're the ones putting it out. But here's the interesting part, Richard. Do you think we'd hear that same question if the tables were turned? If a Republican called for fighting in the streets, would you ask me if a Democratic administration was ready to fight back, or would you just demand their arrest? Richard nods. Fair enough, but some elected Democrats seem pretty fired up over DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Representative L. Monica MacGyver says we're at war. Ilhan Omar warns we might actually see someone get killed. And Chris Van Hollen declares we have to fight this in Congress. We have to fight this in the streets. So what now, Karoline? Do you think those words will lead to real consequences, or is this just political theater? Thank you for quoting those statements, Richard, because I think we need to hear them over and over to grasp how serious this is. Just a second, if those words came from a Republican's mouth, say Ted Cruz or Marjorie Taylor Greene, this room would drown in outrage. Headlines would blare about threatens to democracy. X would light up with hashtags like arrest them now. But when it's Democrats, what happens? A few mild front page stories, some excuses on cable news, and then silence. Let me say this, and I want everyone in this room to listen closely. That kind of violent, incendiary rhetoric is unacceptable, no matter where it comes from. But your silence, your selective outrage, is what's truly unforgivable. If you really care about protecting democracy, why aren't you asking tougher questions of the people calling for war instead of just trying to trap me with hypotheticals? The room bursts into whispers, rapid keystrokes, and loaded glances. Some reporters lean back, absorbing the weight of her words, while others hunch over, scribbling furiously as if hunting for a crack in her argument. But Karoline doesn't stop. She leans forward, her voice dropping lower, but cutting sharper than ever. And by the way, I'll answer your question straight, Richard, because I know some people in this room love to twist my words. This administration won't respond with violence. We'll respond with action. By doing what the American people elected us to do. Fix this country, protect our borders, and ensure the law is enforced. If Democrats want to fight, I suggest they do it at the ballot box, not in the streets. The room falls silent, but it's a dangerous silence, like a coiled spring ready to snap at any moment. The room was still buzzing from the Gaza exchange when a new topic was tossed into the fire. USAID funding, a fresh flashpoint in the battle between the administration and the press. A reporter from Politico spoke first, her tone carefully neutral but her grip on the mic tight, as if holding back anger. Karoline, she began, standing taller to command attention. USAID has gotten a lot of scrutiny in recent days, especially over some taxpayer-funded programs. Now we're hearing that media outlets, including Politico, were part of that funding. Does the president have a comment? And is this administration targeting the free press, as some have warned? When I came out here today, I was made aware of something pretty interesting, Karoline replied, her voice cool but edged with intent. Turns out over $8 million in taxpayer money has been funneled to subsidize political subscriptions. On the American taxpayer's dime. And I'm not just talking about Politico, I'm talking about dozens of media outlets from big papers to small websites, all getting USAID cash to fund their operations. So let me ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Do you think that's a fair use of taxpayer money, or do you think it's a blatant waste, an abuse of government power, and an insult to the millions of Americans working hard to make ends meet? The briefing room had settled, but it was the fleeting calm of a storm's eye. Then, from the back left corner, a reporter raised his voice. Karoline, I want to shift to another issue, tariffs. Trade advisor Richard Navarro said today that tariffs will generate significant revenue and lead to tax cuts. Is it the White House's official stance that tariffs will lower taxes for Americans? And if so, isn't that an admission that President Trump's economic policies are failing since he needs new revenue to offset prior tax cuts? President Trump has always been clear on this. Tariffs are a tax on foreign nations, not Americans, Karoline replied, placing both hands on the podium with a mix of confidence and barely veiled amusement. And yes, he's committed to cutting taxes for Americans right here at home. But here's the interesting part. You talk about finding new revenue. Well, do you think it's a bad thing to make foreign nations pay for America's prosperity? Or do you think it's a smart way to fund this country without taxing Americans? The room fell silent, but it was a dangerous, suffocating silence like a storm brewing. A few reporters hunched over, scribbling furiously, while others exchanged glances, searching for a counterattack. But Karoline didn't stop. She leaned forward, her eyes flashing with defiance. You talk about new revenue, let's talk history, because I know some people in this room like to forget the past. Before World War I, this is exactly how America operated. No income tax. None. The United States was funded through tariffs. Foreign nations paid and America thrived. Look at the numbers. because I know you like hard data. In 1913, before the federal income tax was enacted, 90% of U.S. government revenue came from tariffs and excise taxes. And what happened after that? We started taxing Americans, and the government got bigger, more wasteful, and more disconnected from the people's interests. So let me ask you, and I want an honest answer, do you think returning to a system where foreign nations pay for America's prosperity is a bad thing, or do you think it's a smart way to fund this country without taxing Americans? The room fell into a heavy, stifling silence. A few reporters traded looks, unsure whether to press on. But Karoline didn't give them a chance to breathe. She stood tall, her gaze icy and resolute, and declared, her voice ringing like a victory bell. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why we're about to enter America's golden age. The press briefing had stretched past an hour, but no one in the room felt the time pass. This wasn't just a briefing, it was a battle, and Karoline Leavitt was its undisputed victor. From Gaza to Musk, from immigration to tariffs, she had handled every question, every challenge, and every attempt to corner her with razor-sharp precision, unyielding resolve, and no mercy. Her eyes swept the room, lingering on familiar faces. Kaylee Collins, Garrett Hake, Richard Ducey, those who had tried and failed to trip her up. Then, with a faint knowing smile, she did something unexpected. She looked to the back row, where a young reporter, never before called on, sat with hopeful eyes. "Let's mix it up," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You in the back. Go ahead." The young reporter, a newcomer from a local paper, looked startled, then scrambled for his question. "Karoline," he began, his voice shaky but determined, "you just hinted that eliminating the income tax is on the table. Do you personally think President Trump will go through with it? And if so, how would that change America?" President Trump has never been afraid to think big, and when he sets out to do something, he gets it done, she replied, leaning slightly into the podium, her tone steady and deliberate. Look at what he did in his first term. The Abraham Accords, the biggest tax cuts in modern history, and pulling America out of bad international deals like the Paris Climate Accord. So, if he decides to eliminate the federal income tax, how would that change America? Well, let me paint you a picture, because I think it's important we grasp the potential here. Imagine an America where people don't pay income tax, an America where every worker keeps their full paycheck, where small businesses aren't strangled by complex tax codes, where families can save more, spend more, and invest more in their futures. And imagine an America where government revenue comes from foreign nations through tariffs, not from the pockets of American citizens. That's President Trump's vision, and that's why I say if he pulls this off, he'll go down as one of the greatest presidents in American history. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice calm yet brimming with authority. "That's it for today. Thanks for being here." She turned on her heel and walked off, leaving the reporters scrambling for the headline she just handed them. In the end, every war isn't truly fought on battlefields. It's fought in the minds of people. Truth isn't always pleasant, nor is it always welcomed. But one thing is certain, truth doesn't care if you believe in it. It exists regardless. The world isn't shaped by truth alone, but by how we defend and deliver it. And if you don't control your own narrative, someone else will do it for you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to follow the channel and give us a like. See you in the next video.